I'm Casey Bell, and you're watching Writer to Writer Interviews. Luna's Yum Yum Dim Sum is an amazing children's book that teaches children math and sharing. I got the chance to talk with Natasha Yim, author of this amazing book. Hi, my name is Casey Bell, host of Writer to Writer Interviews, and you are in for another treat as I talk to another writer. Let's take a listen at our interview. What led you to do children's books, to be in the arena of children's books?
Well, I started out actually right out of college writing for magazines, and I was writing adult articles. But then I have my master's in counseling psychology, and I was actually working in a group home and residential treatment center for emotionally disturbed kids. And so it's residential, so they got to stay the night, and they were actually put in these residential treatment centers because things weren't working out at home. Many of them were abused by their families or foster families. And so working with these kids, I would work the swing shift, which is 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. at night. And so a lot of times I would be helping put the children to bed. And some of them were quite young. I mean, these kids range from ages 7 to 14. And, being away from home and their families, a lot of them were anxious, they were scared, they felt lonely at night. And so I would tell them bedtime stories, because I remember as a child growing up always with bedtime stories that my mom would tell us before bed. And I found the power of story to soothe anxieties, to help them feel less lonely. It opened up avenues for them to share their own stories about their childhood and their families. So I decided at that point that there was such a power to story for young children, that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create stories for young children. And I wanted to create stories that would create a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, and at the same time be able to address, emotional fears and anxieties, and also help kids, feel, really engage with the story and have that story help them deal with whatever emotions that they were feeling.
That's amazing. What is Luna's Yum Yum Dim Sum? What is this about, this book?
So Luna's Yum Yum Dim Sum is part of a math concept series. It's called the Story Math Series by Charles Bridge Publishing. And it's each book is written by a different author and covers a different math concept that's woven into a multicultural story. So the whole goal was to not only engage kids in different math concepts, but also in diverse cultures. So I had worked with my editor, Alyssa Pusey, from Charles Bridge on a previous book called Goldilocks and the Three Pandas. And so when they started developing this math series with Turk, which is an educational company based in Boston, I mean, not Boston, sorry, Massachusetts. When they were developing these stories, she sent me an email saying, "We're developing this math series. Would you be interested in, writing a, manuscript on spec for the series?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I never thought, that I was ever good at math. But when I got the samples from her, I thought, oh, shapes and numbers, and yeah, I can do this. My immediate thought was I wanted to set this story in a dim sum restaurant, which is a restaurant. I don't know if you've ever had dim sum at all, but they're like small plates, and it's usually served around the lunch hour, maybe from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And restaurant servers will push these carts out or trolleys, and you get to pick these little dim sum um, dishes from this trolley. And it was always like a lot of fun as a kid going to a dim sum restaurant, and I love dim sum. So immediately I wanted to set the story in a dim sum restaurant, because with all the different dim sum dishes, there was so many shapes and colors and numbers, and then you can, as plates come in, you get to eat them, and then you get to subtract the dim sum that you eat. So I thought, oh, this would be a good tie-in to the whole math concept. But then as it turned out, my first draft, she said, we're not really looking for a straight numbers and shapes book, because there's so many of them out there. So she put me in touch with Marlene, who is from the Turk company, to sort of brainstorm some other ideas about math concepts. And what they really wanted was, they wanted a story where the characters get to solve a math problem. And so that's when we sort of worked out this idea of, well, what if they shared, some pork buns? They order some pork buns, and they have maybe 5 pork buns that is shared between 3 kids. How would they do that equitably? So it started from that concept, and we sort of worked it out with the whole story is about, how do you divide up these pork buns amongst 3 kids, and how is it, equitable, and is equitable the same as equal? And so it would allow the story to generate a lot of discussions, I think, between parents and kids about not only the math concept itself, but in terms of sharing, and the the whole idea of, how do you share things, and what is fair and not fair.
All right. All right. And I guess you answered my next question, what inspired the book itself, the story, and all that, which you've already answered. So this was this your first book, or you've had books prior to this, right?
Yes. So this is actually my 7th book.
Okay. All right. So what has the publishing process been like for you? Start from the beginning. What did you learn? How did you learn what you learned? Because unless you know someone in publishing, you don't know anything. So right. How did you know where to go, and what did you look up, and what was your process like?
Well, I think when I started, my first book was published in 2000. So that was quite a while ago. And so I started writing. So with picture books, it generally takes, from the time your manuscript is accepted, it takes about 2.5 years to 3 years, because of the illustration process, to actually get it onto the bookshelves. But prior to that, there's like years of writing and revising and submitting. So it is a long process. And I think when I first started out, I started attending writers' conferences. That was where I learned, everything about how to submit, how to, query publishers and editors. And so I started from there, just kind of being curious and learning the ropes. And I attended workshops and conferences. And at one of the conferences, we were referred to the Writers Market, which lists all the publishers there are that are accepting, submissions. So I went there and I kind of looked at, and I'm not sure how I found Charlesbridge. I just, kind of looked at the books, and I looked at the catalogs and thought, oh, they publish really cute books. And I submitted. At that time, everything is done by post. So you had to kind of send it out, and you included your self-addressed stamped envelope for any kind of rejection letters. And it was definitely a much more cumbersome process. Nowadays, you can oftentimes submit things electronically. In fact, Charlesbridge prefers it electronic, and all the editing and revisions are done electronically. Whereas back in those days, they sent you your handwritten manuscript back. And so that was how I got started looking for a publisher. And Charlesbridge actually was the first publisher, that first manuscript I sent to them was a, what turned into my book, Otto's Rainy Day. And it was a very, I realized that Charlesbridge was just such a wonderful company or publishing company to work for, because after about 6 months of not hearing from them, I get this envelope in the mail, and I thought, oh shoot, it must be a rejection letter, because if they accepted your manuscript, they usually give you a phone call. And so when I opened it up, it was a letter from Charlesbridge, but it said, we're really backlogged in the reading of manuscripts, and we will get to your manuscript. So take heart, don't give up. We will get there soon, and we'll contact you when we do. And so I thought, oh, that's really nice, because most of the time you don't hear from publishers unless they are interested in your work. And then at about the 9-month mark, I get a phone call, and I was like so excited, because I thought, oh, this is it. This is the call. And it wasn't quite the call. She did call and say, we're still really backlogged. We haven't gone to your manuscript yet. And we're trying to catch up on all the reading. And I thought, okay, well, it's disappointing it wasn't the call, but that was really nice of them to, give me a call and catch me up on what was happening. And then I finally, after about a year, I did get the call that they were interested in the book. And so that was in itself quite an unusual experience, because it was the first publisher I picked for that manuscript. And since that time, I have had countless of rejections from, for different manuscripts for different publishing houses. But that was how my first book got published. And then since that time, I've written 2 nonfiction biographies, and that was an entirely different process. So every time a book, I write a book that gets accepted, and I have to say there are countless other books between those times that did not get accepted, and I got rejection letters from. So just because you have a book published doesn't necessarily make it easier for the next book to get published. I think it's so much a matter of timing and who you send the manuscript to, and what they're publishing in that time frame that you've sent the manuscript. So, but I think what I've learned through this whole process is to be patient and to persevere. And my favorite quote that I have above my computer is from author John, what's his name? Richard Bach. Yes. So he's the author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And so his quote is, a professional writer is an amateur who didn't quit. And so I have that posted up above my computer, because that is so true. To make it in this business, you have to persevere.
Going back to, you said when you were working with the children, did you ever get a chance were you still working there when your books were published, and did you get a chance to read them your books?
No, I wasn't working there at that time anymore. I was actually working in Child Protective Services when my first book got published. So I didn't get to read to those children, but I have read to, many children through bookstore visits and school visits and all that. And kids connect to the readings and the books in different ways. And I hear from people, from teachers and librarians, oh, this is, the kids come in and they request this book over and over again, or, so when your books are connecting with the children you read them to. So that's very gratifying. I think that's the most gratifying part about being a children's author, is that children will ask to have a book read to them, or to read a book over and over again if they really connect to it, which is very different from the adult reader. They may read a book once and, oh yeah, this is a really great book, and they may pass it to a friend, but you don't get that whole sense of, wonder, or this whole sense of, I really want to read this book over and over again. So I feel very gratified when I get emails or letters from parents and from teachers and librarians telling me how much a book has been requested.
Last question. You already gave some, but can you give more tips to the someone who wants to write children? Either they haven't written it yet, they're not sure where to find an illustrator, they're not sure what steps to take, or they've written it but they don't know the next step. What tips can you give them so that they can finally start this process?
Well, I think writing is a very isolating profession because normally when you're writing, you're in a room by yourself, putting words to paper or on your computer. So I think it's very important to find your writing community, whether you join a writers group, you start a writers group, or for writers of children's literature, I always recommend join the SCBWI, the Society of Children Book Writers and Illustrators. Their website is very simple to remember, is scbwi.org. And they're just they have chapters. They have about 70 chapters all over the world. So you can join almost from anywhere you are. And they have tons of resources on their website. They have conferences, workshops. You can find, your community right there through SCBWI, and then attend workshops and conferences, because I think the publishing trends change all the time. So it's really important to kind of keep up with what is happening in the industry. And so attend conferences where editors and agents are also present and are talking about what is the publishing climate and what kind of work they're looking for. Oftentimes these are houses that are closed to unsolicited submissions, so you have to have an agent to submit to them. So if you don't have an agent, but you attend the workshop, a lot of times they are open to submissions for a limited time period for people who are unagented. So this is one way to kind of get your work in the door and get your work seen by these publishing houses. And writing is a constant learning process. I find even after 20 years of doing this that I'm always learning something new because the trends keep changing. So it's always good to sort of educate yourself. So I would definitely join a community, join SCBWI, attend writing workshops and conferences just to keep up to date with what's going on. And then there's always I always find people that I've met in other conferences, and so you keep that connection and networking, which is very important in this business.
Just to add to that, because I know I really don't know what's going to happen by the time people see this, but some people might be saying, well, there are no workshops, there are no conferences, but there are still webinars and they're going digital. And so I would add, find the digital conferences where they're, because they're always put on by experienced people.
Right, exactly. And right now, everyone is, turning to or transforming their in-person workshops into some kind of digital format workshop. So the SCBWI has two major national conferences, and one is in LA, and then they also have the SCBWI New York conference, and both have been turned into digital conferences this year. So so attend as many workshops as you can. The digital conferences have great information. They may not have that network, the same
Right.
network capability as your in-person workshop, but you can still connect with people and you can still get the information that will help you with your writing career.
Hey, are you a writer, a songwriter, a playwright, screenwriter, author? You write articles, poetry. If you're a writer, I want to sit down and talk with you. Go to my website, authorkcbell.com, and click on Writer to Writer interviews for more information. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this message.
Luna's Yum Dim Sum, written by Natasha Yim, teaches children math and sharing. A great book for all children. For more information, go to natashayim.com.
We are back for another exciting conversation. Let's take a listen.
Thanks for having me on this show. I think it's such a great idea. And I have tons of questions. I always have tons of questions when I'm talking to other authors because I'm very fascinated by the writing process. So finding just the 5 questions was definitely a challenge. So you're a playwright and author of fiction and nonfiction books. So I find, because I'm a playwright too, I haven't written any full-length plays. I've kept mine to the short format, 1-act plays and 10-minute plays, but they're both very different hats that you have to wear. So my first question is, do you ever do both at the same time? And if you do, how do you transition from one format to the other?
I don't think I've ever written 2 at the same time. I've worked on, like recently during the pandemic, I worked on like 3 or 4 different short films, but not at the same time. Like I always finish one, and then when one is done, I go to the next. But no, I've never had, I can't recall a time where I had both ideas in my head at the same time to where I can work on 2 at the same time. Transitioning, how do I transition? Well, it's when I get an idea, the first thing I decide, is it a play or is it a book or is it a film? That's the first thing I ask. Once I figure that out, then before I even start writing it or writing out a, what do you call it? Like a timeline and all that, the first thing I do is at least get a bulk of it into my head first. Like the beginning, middle, the end, the twists and turns, the, characters involved. And then from there, I sit down and write out a guideline. And then from there, I write it out.
So you think of the idea first, and then you decide if it's a play or a novel?
Right.
Oh, interesting. And so how do you make that decision? What makes you decide, oh, this is going to be a play and this is more suitable for a book?
Depending on, I guess you can say, how I want the storyline set up. If I know I like, one of the books I wrote is in so many different places. They're at a little league team show, whatever. They're in a gift store. They're in so many different places. They're in a prison. There's a point where they're in prison. And so when it's had too many scenery, I put it into a book because that's too difficult to put that into play form. Okay. Just as long as I can put it into, as much as possible, 3 scenes or less, and I don't have too many characters, then I'll bring it into a play. But when I have so much, I put it into a book form.
Great. So for your nonfiction series, American History, how do you pick which historical subjects to include?
It's mainly first come, first serve, random. What I wanted to do was pick people that most Americans don't know exist. Don't know what they did, don't know what they contributed. So that was the first thing, was trying to find inventors who was either the first to create something or the first to do something for the most part. Every now and again, I'll put someone in there who enhanced an invention, but for the most part, I wanted the first timers. These are the ones who invented something for the first time that most people didn't even know. And it's, as I was researching each book, I would just be picking, like I said, first come, first serve. Whoever I saw first is who I chose. But it took a long time to do it because there were a lot of inventors, but like I said, a lot of them enhanced an invention or they added to something. And then some of them were like, in the science world, I couldn't, because they're for children, I wanted to make sure I could relate to where they can understand what the person did. A lot of the inventors, I couldn't understand it myself. So I was like, I couldn't find a way. And then the things I could understand, I couldn't find a way to say it where I wasn't lessening what they did for the sake of children understanding it. I wanted to make sure what they did was not less than what they actually did so that children can understand it. So that's how I chose each inventor. And then last but not least, I wanted to make sure it was an even amount. So there's 14 in each book. There's 7 men and 7 women.
Okay,
And that's
great.
how
So you mentioned research, which of course is a huge part of writing nonfiction. How did you go about researching these subjects? And do you have any research tips and strategies to share?
I mean, I did mostly the internet. Any tips? Be open-minded when researching, because even though I knew, researching made me realize how much I didn't know. I knew I didn't know, but I didn't know how much I didn't know until I started researching. So don't go in with the mindset you know, because you can research something that you think you know and then have a hard time finding it because it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you go into research, go with the mindset of, even though you may have knowledge from school or wherever, pretend like you don't have that knowledge and go through fresh, because it was very difficult looking up. Like I remember I was looking up something specifically from something I heard someone invented, and in researching it, I couldn't find it. And in further research, I realized what I heard wasn't actually true. Mm-hmm. So you got to go in without knowledge, so to speak. Even with the knowledge you have, research without that knowledge, because it was in some ways tiring.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's 8 books, and I'm now in the process of, I might add a 9th book, but the knowledge that I have of the research is making me not want to do it, because it was just very frustrating. It was very tiring because I thought, oh, this should be easy. Like I'll find these in like 2 seconds. No,
Right.
not at all. So I would just say, just research, and don't go in thinking you know. And even if you think you know, be okay to realize you don't know when you find your information.
Right. Yes, I've written 2 nonfiction biographies, and I love the research part of it, because you always learn things you never knew, and you learn so much about the character that you're writing about. But I find myself going down these, rabbit holes, because you would research something and go, oh, this is really interesting, and then you go over here. So how do you stay focused when you're doing your research and not, wind up in this maze of rabbit tunnels?
I can't say that I was completely focused. There were times where I did go down the rabbit tunnel. But what I also did was, because I knew I was writing a series, if I found a rabbit tunnel, I would write that information down for the next book. But it was, I will say, in some ways I did get distracted, because other things would pop up and I would start. I mean, when you learn something you didn't know, you kind of want to just, oh, okay. And so I would, but also the thing was for me, and I know this is different for all authors, for me it was self-published. So I had no timeline, and no one knew I was doing it, so no one was expecting it. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have I have to hurry this up. But for me, I will say, because it was frustrating and annoying, and I really got to the point where I really didn't want to do it anymore, I stayed focused, because I knew the sooner I'm done, the sooner I'm done. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So right. I guess you can say, keep that in mind. And especially if you are an author with a publishing company, they do have deadlines. There is no such thing as, right. So keep that in mind, that if you do have a deadline, stay as focused as possibly as you can, because when they want that book, you got to have it to them. Mm-hmm.
So my last question is, are your books self-published, or are they a combination of self-published and traditionally published, or published with small presses?
As of now, they're all self-published.
So do you have any tips for writers who want to get started in the self-publishing process? And what should they do first if they want to self-publish a book?
The first thing you should do is, I would say, research marketing, mm-hmm. advertising, and PR, because self-publishing is easy. It's the getting the book read by readers is not easy. when I say easy, I mean, you can literally self-publish a book in 2 minutes. Now, of course, the book might be crap. There might be hundreds of thousands of typos, but it doesn't change the fact that you can still publish it.
Mm-hmm.
But I would definitely say research that part first, and then ask yourself, why are you writing it? Like, is it to entertain? Is it to educate? Is it to inspire, encourage? Like, ask those questions. I always use the ends. Is it to entertain, encourage, inspire, educate? Like, what is your purpose? Because you want to make sure that when you start marketing, that's your purpose. So if your purpose is to encourage, or actually, if your purpose is to educate people on finances, on budgeting or learning how to get out of debt, then when you're writing it, make sure that is your only, that is your goal, to not only to write it, but to, how do I say, publish it. Because I know when I first started out, my thing was, oh, I can't give out free books. I have to make money.
Right.
But one of my books, my purpose of it was to educate people. And so if someone said I don't have the money, I gave them the book because the purpose wasn't to make money from it. The purpose of it was to educate them because I didn't want them to make the same mistakes I made. So you have to know what your purpose is and realize when that time comes around to talk about your book or to give out your book, remember, why am I doing this? And let that be your driving force of why you're doing it in the first place. Because if it's to educate or to entertain or whatever, even as you said, even though it may be a long process if you go through the traditional way and it takes them a year, 2 years, 3 years for them to finally say, yes, we want your book, you still have to keep in mind, but what was your purpose of writing it? Because if it was to educate, then don't just give up, say, just forget it. I won't ever do this again. Keep going. And even if you get, because you said your first company was your first yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's so rare. So I don't want people going, oh, I'll just say that. No, if you get a no, go to the second company. A no, go to the third company. Because remember, your goal is to educate or to entertain or to inspire or to encourage or whatever. And so that would be the main thing, is to research, find your why, and then find an editor.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things I found out for myself, because the first book I edited like 5 times myself, and then finally I gave it to someone and she found more mistakes, and I was like, what? But I edited it 5 times. So find an editor, make sure it's right. I mean, it doesn't have to be, how do I say, because sometimes they say, oh, you write the wrong way. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want, if people review your book on Amazon or Goodreads, you don't want the main complaints, reviews being, it was horribly written, too many mistakes, too many typos, blah, blah, blah. Because now that's, those reviews are on there forever, and it can cause people to not. And even you may have a great story, you may have a great message, but then no one's going to want to get it because they realize you have all those errors.
Right.
So definitely find an editor and learn how to be patient. Because it really is, unless, once you get to the point to where you are like Oprah Winfrey or, what's his name, Stephen King,
Mm-hmm.
then it's quick and easy to get your book published, But when you're in the beginning stages, you got to learn how to be patient, because there is no overnight status.
Right. Well, thank you, Casey. Those are really good tips because they apply to publishing the traditional way as well. Patience, perseverance, and definitely make sure you get other eyes on your work. Yesterday, I met with my writers group and they critique a chapter of my middle grade historical fiction novel in progress. And they picked out something that I thought was so clear and it wasn't, and people were confused. And so it really helped me to kind of see it from their perspective. So definitely, getting somebody eyes on your work is crucial, I think, in that process.
Yeah, definitely. I wish I would have done that in the beginning. I thought I was good, but I wasn't. And yes, I will say, What you hear when you're writing, others may, like you said, others may not understand it.
Right.
Even though you understood it when you heard it, others may not. So that's why it's definitely a great idea to get a, and they now have, what do they call it? Beta readers. I don't know if you've heard of that, which is a free way of getting people to read your stuff before you publish it. For those who say, well, I can't afford an editor.
Right.
But I say research, because I mean, there are editors that, like, you know, charge thousands of dollars, but you can find affordable editing. You just got to look for them.
Yeah, and I think, you know, having a writers group, you know, other writers who are either writing in your genre, and even if they're not, who, you know, when you write, you kind of know what's good grammar, what's, you know, if you're missing a punctuation, if your character is falling flat. So, you know, having a good writers group that's not only honest, I think that's important. You don't want people that just tell you your story is wonderful, because that is not helpful. Who are honest, but at the same time supportive, because you also don't want people who would just trash your work and make you feel demoralized. So so I think that is very important. And when I first started out, I knew I wanted to be in a writers group. And I live in a small town, and I looked around and couldn't find any writers group. So I started one. So that's, you know, definitely an option for you. You know, just post up something in your local library, or, you know, if you have some writing friends, or if you join a workshop or conference, you meet people, and then, you know, maybe they're looking for a writers group. So, you know, definitely you can create your own if you can't find one close by.
And that is all the time we have for you today on this episode of Writer to Writer Interviews. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. That is all we have for you today. Thank you for watching. Join us again next week for another episode of Writer to Writer Interviews.